For this installment of Script to Screen, we'll be looking at a movie that is near and dear to my heart, Casper. This is in honor of the movie's 25th anniversary. Oh my god, I saw this in theaters. Despite most of his cartoon and comic appearances up to that point being relentlessly cheerful and occasionally saccharine, the goal for this movie was to find the real heart of the story. Lonely people who have trouble connecting, finding each other. The titular Friendly Ghost was created by Famous Studios in 1945 for a cartoon called The Friendly Ghost, which summed up much of what was to come. Casper is a ghost who doesn't want to scare people, he wants to be their friend. After some heartache, he finds people who will accept him, at least until the next cartoon when he's suddenly lonely again. Lather, rinse, repeat. Although he had plenty of shorts produced for movie theaters and television, Casper was probably best known for his appearances in Harvey Comics. In these comics, the concept of a ghost was changed somewhat. Although the old cartoons had made it clear that ghosts were the souls of once living beings, the cartoons seemed to portray ghosts as magical creatures, not unlike fairies or leprechauns. Casper was born to ghost parents and perhaps would grow up to be an adult ghost someday. What would happen to him when he grew into an elderly ghost and died is beyond me, and probably beyond the writers as well. For the movie, Casper returned to his undead roots. They pulled no punches with this one. Casper is explicitly stated to be a dead child, one who is emotionally stunted at age 12 or 13. While the Harvey comics had a slew of supporting characters, like Spooky the tough little ghost, Hot Stuff the little devil, Wendy the good little witch, and Nightmare the ghost horse, the only other characters who joined Casper on the big screen were the ghostly trio. In the comics, the trio was made up of Fatso, Lazo, and Fusso. Fatso was the tough guy leader, Lazo was a loafer, and Fusso had a persnickety personality. Their relation to Casper was unclear. They didn't like him or his friendliness, but they still hung around him, giving the implication that they were older brothers or cousins. The movie renamed them Fatso, Stretch, and Stinky, with Stretch taking over as the leader. They were now Casper's uncles, and they still hated how friendly and passive the little ghost was. As a tribute to Harvey Comics, Harvey became the last name of the family who Casper befriends. With that context in mind, let's take a look at the script. The movie was written by Sherry Stoner and Deanna Oliver, who had previously collaborated on Tiny Toon Adventures and Animaniacs. Steven Spielberg, who was the executive producer of these shows and of Casper, admired their talents and selected them for the job. Although Tiny Toons and Animaniacs had their share of sentimental moments, Casper was a place where the two writers could really tug at the heartstrings, in addition to coming up with cartoonish scenarios for the cast. The script draft that I have is marked as the 11th draft, dated February 8th, 1994. There are parts of it that are very close to the final product, but there are a number of alternate or cut scenes present. It seems like a good deal of these scenes might have been filmed, as some of them are mentioned in the movie's novelization, and there are production photos that seem to depict them as well. A lot of these were probably cut for timing, and occasionally budget. As we look at these differences, I'll also be injecting my own thoughts on the movie. I've seen a lot of Casper fans over the years, and I've also heard quite a bit of criticism directed at the movie as well. As I said, I really love this movie, but I'll admit that there are certain parts of it that don't always hit the mark. But enough prattling, let's get to the script. The first section is pretty much what you see in the final cut, barring some small dialogue alterations here and there. We don't get to see Casper until 7 minutes into the movie, and we don't get a proper look at his uncles until even later. The director, Brad Silberling, mentions in the audio commentary that this was a deliberate choice to create suspense. And I can say that it certainly worked on me as a kid. I really wanted to see these ghosts. A cutscene has Casper sadly calling out to Kerrigan and Dibbs when they are first frightened away. He nervously turns to his uncles, who are still unseen by the audience, and claims he was waiting to really scare them, before one of the uncles squeezes his neck, causing his head to bulge. The scene with the exorcists is the same in the script as it is in the movie, featuring Don Novello and Dan Aykroyd, but 2 other cameos were considered. Zelda Rubinstein was to show up as her character from Poltergeist, and would have been shot out the chimney. Jason Miller from The Exorcist was also considered, but he was unavailable at the time. To further illustrate Casper's desperation for a friend, a scene was written where he aimlessly flies through the town of Friendship, Maine at night. He hears 3 boys laughing, and flies into the house where the kids are having a sleepover. Casper's offer to tell a ghost story is of course met with screams. Casper flees downstairs where the boy's father is watching an episode of Hard Copy, featuring Dr. James Harvey and his daughter Kat. In the movie, the scene was simplified to having Casper simply stumble upon the show in the manor while channel flipping, which worked fine. In the commentary, Silberling mentions that the use of a TV documentary for exposition really helped move the story along in a somewhat organic fashion, and I'll agree on that. Kat's proper introduction was cut from the film. She is seen auditioning for either the school's glee club or an a cappella group called the Cactus Crooners. Remember, she's in Santa Fe at the moment. The girls in the group are hesitant to let her join due to her weird father, but one nice boy seems to have a crush on her, and ultimately Kat is let into the group, just as her father bursts in, announcing they're moving to Maine to look for ghosts. According to a still shot, this scene was filmed. Dr. Harvey even mentions the Cactus Crooners by name in the next scene that did make it into the movie, so if anyone was wondering what he meant, there you go. Kat wandering around Whipstaff was a bit longer in the original cut, and included gags like Casper turning into a gargoyle to spy on her, and Kat finding a doorway that led into a dark echoing pit. She also had a line in the script about how the house looked like something Dr. Seuss threw up, which was cut because it allegedly wouldn't go over well with the parents in the audience. Despite that explanation, somehow the not one but two jokes where Kerrigan is explicitly called a bitch remained in the movie. As the ghostly trio makes their grand entrance, I should mention that there was a decent amount of ad-libbing done with their actors. Even a few small alterations they did seem to improve some of the lines. For instance, the script has Fatso saying, "Hey horsey," and then pretending to scare a horse, while in the movie his line was, "Here Flicka," and for whatever reason that just made it a lot funnier. There were only a few differences with the trio's intro, like Stretch kicking Casper into the sky while in the movie he slingshots him. There's also a shot of the trio peeking out of a suit of armor while stalking Dr. Harvey that was filmed, but didn't make the cut. A somewhat well-known cut moment was when the trio morphs Dr. Harvey's face into 3 celebrities and 1 crypt keeper. Originally, between Dangerfield and Gibson, Harvey was supposed to morph into Steven Spielberg, who would have been frantically crying, "What am I doing here?" It was allegedly cut for time, although Spielberg implied he wasn't comfortable as an actor. Casper was going to help out a bit during the battle with the ghostly trio. When Dr. Harvey arms himself with a vacuum, it does nothing. The trio close in on him, but Casper uses himself as an extension cord and gives the vacuum the power that the Doctor needs to suck up the ghosts, also electrocuting himself in the process. Kat notices this and is visibly impressed. 2 scenes following this were filmed and cut. Kat and her father hide out in their car with mixed emotions. Dr. Harvey is ecstatic at the definitive proof of ghosts, and the elated hopes that he'll finally be reunited with his dead wife Amelia. Kat is hesitant to see her mother again, afraid it'll just hurt more. They lie down to sleep in the car, but end up wide awake. The next morning, Kerrigan and Dibbs show up and find Dr. Harvey asleep. Kerrigan berates him some more, and they leave. The scene where Kat walks to school contains a fairly important moment in her and Casper's relationship that was completely cut from the movie. In the final cut, she is initially scared of Casper, bonds with him at breakfast, and then is suddenly rather cold to him when the cute boy from school, Vic, asks her to the dance. This scene would have explained her coldness, and it would have given their friendship more depth, but ultimately it seems this was all cut for time. As Kat walks to school, Casper desperately follows her like a puppy, giving her advice on the quickest routes to take, handing her lunch, and trying to tag along as a hat or a pair of mittens. Kat drops some not-so-subtle hints that Casper needs to leave. She just wants to have a chance at a normal life. As normal as a girl who's moved into a haunted house can have, of course. And Casper is completely oblivious. Love-struck, he tells her, "I just knew you'd be even prettier in person." Of course, Kat wants to know what he means, and Casper nervously admits that he's the reason Kerrigan called her dad, why she's been uprooted once again and lost another chance at having friends. All because a little ghost boy saw her on TV and got a crush. Naturally, Kat is furious and basically tells Casper to piss off. As Kat enters school, we cut back to Whipstaff Manor in a scene that was moved to a little later in the movie. As in the final version, the trio pretends to know Dr. Harvey's wife to mess with his head. The line about them helping him find her if he keeps Kerrigan away is not present, however. After Fatso appears in drag as a mock version of Amelia, there was a scene filmed of them throwing Dr. Harvey in a chair out of the manor. Kerrigan and Dibbs are dining at a dockside restaurant nearby and see the Doctor fall into the harbor. Honestly, they made the right choice cutting this. Fatso was already a funny punchline there, they didn't need to add another. At school, Kat does not appreciate Casper tying all her classmates' shoelaces together. Vic passes by and shares his excitement at the whipstaff party. As he leaves, he slips on a puddle on the hallway floor, which is really a disguised Casper. Kat is sure to stomp on the puddle in anger on her way out, smudging Casper's face. Following this, a scene was filmed with Kerrigan and Dibbs looking at Whipstaff's blueprints and figuring out the location of the treasure. Quite a bit of material was cut with these two, as you can see, which is why they seem to disappear from the movie for pretty much the whole second act. The next scene had Casper sadly floating home to find Dr. Harvey sitting outside, his confidence shattered by the trio. Inside, sounds of the trio destroying the house are heard. Casper tries to open up to Dr. Harvey, and the distracted doc gives him some rather confusing advice about the he that he wants to be or something. It has a very who's on first kind of feel, and if you're curious, a shortened version of their conversation was actually used in the follow-up animated series, The Spooktacular New Adventures of Casper. Despite not understanding the doctor's advice, Casper thanks him. Feeling a little more confident, Dr. Harvey re-enters his office where the trio are waiting for a rematch. He pulls out a chart explaining that he wants to help them cross over into the afterlife. Stretch and Stinky dismiss the chart and disappear. Fatso, looking a little shy, stays behind. Dr. Harvey encourages him to share his feelings, and so Fatso does.
Doc, I don't know what to do. I'm in a crisis, I'm toxic, I'm severely underfed, I'm screwy, I'm wacko, I'm cuckoo in the head.
This suddenly leads into a song where Fatso swings the doctor around the room, continuing to sing about his many mental illnesses. Stretch and Stinky back him up on the organ, dismissing each of Fatso's problems with a reminder that it doesn't matter anymore.
I cannot relate or communicate. I tend to fixate on my own self-hate.
Forget about it, you're dead.
Things get even crazier as the song goes on. Books fly off the shelves and around the room, Fatso splits into multiple versions of himself, and finally, Dr. Harvey finds himself on his own therapy couch, floating in the air as the ghosts finish their big number.
Psychologically, you don't need therapy.
Why not?
Forget about it, you're dead.
By the time the scene was filmed, the song was now called Lucky Enough to Be a Ghost, and had the same general idea, although it focused on all three of the trio members as opposed to mostly Fatso. This is the only deleted scene that is fully available on the DVD release, where you can see Bill Pullman doing some really impressive dance moves, considering he isn't really being thrown around by the trio, this is all him. The animation budget would have apparently skyrocketed to ludicrous proportions had they completed the CGI for the scene, so it was tragically cut. There seemed to be an effort to work what they could into the movie, however. A user posted a clip from a Casper workprint that featured the scene on DVD, minus the singing portion. Essentially, Dr. Harvey shows the ghosts his chart, this was the only part that was fully animated, and they simply throw him onto the couch and cackle as he floats around the room. On the extended soundtrack that was recently released, there's a track called The Doctor Is In that has previously unreleased music that went unused in the movie, which seems to correlate to this scene. If there was underscore written and recorded for this scene, it must have gotten pretty far in the editing process before it was cut. Honestly, I think it was for the best, because without the song, the scene just kind of falls flat. A musical number based on the earlier version of the song was eventually used in the Spooktacular cartoon series.
I feel the self-hate cause I can't relate. I party trained late, I can't get a date.
Forget about it, you're a ghost.
The bonding scene between Kat and Casper at the lighthouse is mostly the same, although with the context of their deleted argument beforehand, it feels more emotionally sound. This is the moment where Kat is able to forgive Casper, realizing that he has it even worse than her. After Casper and Kat fall asleep, the ghost of Amelia was to appear at her daughter's bedside, although at the time, it's made unclear if she's a ghost or merely a dream. I think they made the right decision to move her appearance to the end of the movie to get the full emotional effect. The scene where Dr. Harvey confronts the trio again was shortened. He originally enters aggressively and demands the ghosts leave, even spraying them with a fire extinguisher. The ghosts, of course, mock his attempts and continue to mess with him until the doctor gives up. Feeling some genuine concern for him, they offer him a drink, which inspires Dr. Harvey to use some reverse psychology on them to get out of the house and spend a night drinking. In the movie, Dr. Harvey simply ignores the ghosts, which is enough to get them to take him themselves with no prompting. While I think it was good to shorten the scene, the movie makes it a little harder to tell if the Doctor was trying to get them to take him out to a bar or not. Either way, the ghosts are out, and Kerrigan and Dibbs are in. Before Casper finds his redecorated room, there was a cute visual gag cut where he is literally dusting the staircase by scattering dust on it. A haunted house has to look its best, after all. Later in the attic, he and Kat come across a photo of his uncles when they were alive. Again, this scene was filmed, but cut. The scene at the bar, where Dr. Harvey and the trio, was to come a little earlier after we see Casper as an egg in the machine. Dr. Harvey was going to sing a parody of That's Life called That's Death, which was a callback to the song he was singing in the car earlier in the film. We would see more shots of the bar that made it clear that most of the sober patrons fled in fear when the trio arrived. Dr. Harvey's passionate, drunken speech to the trio is a little longer, where he explains to them that when he's with them, he doesn't feel like he's lost everything. He doesn't feel alone. He admires their boldness. This is what initially elicits their tears. Meanwhile, the scene where Kerrigan and Dibbs chase each other through the mansion trying to kill each other was a bit longer, with a cut shot making it briefly into the trailer. It's a fun sequence, but I understand the want to shorten it. According to Silberling in the commentary, Kerrigan's ghost was originally modeled in the nude like Casper and his uncles, but they found she was simply too shapely to work in a kids' movie without a ghost top on. After Kat lets in the party guests, she finds Casper in the library and hands him the potion to power the Lazarus machine. Casper morphs back into Kerrigan, who had disguised herself as the friendly ghost. When she flies through a wall, she drops the potion. The real Casper grabs it, and he and Kat head downstairs, right as Amber and Vic climb in through the window. I completely understand omitting this scene. It really didn't add anything. I think out of all the scenes that were cut, the next one is one I wish had made it in. Yes, even more than the musical number. If you'll remember, in the final cut of the movie, when Kat makes her ghostly father remember who he is, the trio expresses disappointment, and then they kind of disappear from the scene. The script had them actively try to block Casper's path so he couldn't bring Dr. Harvey to life again. No, you don't. We finally got a fourth for Bridge. He ain't going nowhere.
If you know what's good for you, you'll make yourself scarce.
Yeah, run along and do your chores.
Chores? I'm not doing any stinking chores! After nearly 100 years, Casper has finally reached his breaking point. He begins to slowly expand in size, soon towering over his uncles. From now on, you can make your own mess. And if I want to clean up after you, I will. If I want to hang out with the living, you can't stop me. You can't stop me from doing anything! Yo, Bulbhead, lighten up.
Don't call me Bullhead!
The trio flee in terror. For once, Casper has scared them. I'm guessing the logic behind cutting that scene was to keep the focus on Casper's sacrifice for the girl he loves, even if it means ruining his own chances of being with her. Still, seeing him be able to stand up to his uncles would have been immensely satisfying. Heck, I felt good just reading it. Oh well. At the dance, there's a little bit more focus on Kat waiting for Vic, who, unbeknownst to her, has been scared out of the house along with Amber. Human Casper, of course, dances with her, but the script had him dressed in an elaborate pirate costume, a reference to the games he played with his dad. I like just having him in plain white clothes in the final version. He doesn't need a costume. Tonight, he's dressed as a real boy. Amelia appears to Dr. Harvey, but their conversation is shorter in the script. I prefer the final movie version, which was generally sweeter. I'll admit that, as embarrassing as it is for me to say, it's hard for me to watch this scene without shedding a tear or two. So, that's the script to Casper. Overall, it's a solid script to a solid movie, a few flaws withstanding. For instance, a commonly cited plot hole is in regards to the nature of ghosts in their universe. Casper and his uncles don't remember their previous lives, and as a result, they look like cartoons, devoid of human features. The implication is that Kerrigan and Dr. Harvey's ghosts will eventually become the same way. But Kerrigan has memories, while Dr. Harvey does not. If you pay attention, Kerrigan does seem to be a little scatterbrained at one point, forgetting why they're under Whiff staff in the first place, with Dibbs having to remind her. Perhaps Dibbs has been constantly reminding her on the way over, and that's why she's able to retain most of her memories, along with dying with a strong drive to find that treasure. Dr. Harvey, meanwhile, died in a heavily inebriated state, and the script makes it a little more clear that he's been so burdened with grief that he desperately wants to forget everything. Thus, it was easier for his ghost to let go of the past. It's the kind of thing that makes sense when you read between the lines, and while I don't think an audience should be spoon-fed all the time, it might have helped if they had explained this part a little more. This brings up the question of why Casper is still around if his own unfinished business was to comfort his grieving father, which ended up sending his father to an insane asylum. You'd think that when his father died, Casper would have crossed over himself. And what about the ghostly trio? Who knows what their baggage is? But aside from the plot hole aspect, I think the script's only other big flaw is that it feels a little bloated at times. We have the Casper Cat plot, the Dr. Harvey trio plot, the Kerrigan Dibbs plot, and the Vic Amber plot. I feel that maybe if they had cut the Vic and Amber stuff, the movie could breathe a little more and feel a little less cluttered. While the Vic and Amber subplot might have worked better if they kept in the material with Cat being angry at Casper, I think it still would have been a plot thread that would have better been left out of the final product. Overall, though, I think the positives of the story outweigh the negatives. It's a darker family movie that explores death and grieving in a way that kids can hopefully wrap their heads around. It added a backstory to Casper, something I don't think he ever had before this, and it was an appropriately tragic one. The fact that the movie wasn't afraid to be sad or grim is good. The material of the ghostly trio balances the tragedy out nicely, and the movie ends up feeling well-rounded as a result. For a while, I didn't care for the ending, where Casper gets to kiss Cat and then immediately turns back into a ghost. It felt unsatisfactory, but at the same time, Casper is iconic as a ghost. You're not going to turn him into a human and keep him that way, especially when a sequel is being considered. But superficial franchise reasons aside, the fact that it isn't a 100% happy ending, but all the characters seem to be happy enough with their unconventional family is refreshing. Speaking of sequels, a proper sequel was planned, but ultimately never produced. Aside from the animated series, a few follow-up films were eventually made for the direct-to-video market, like the Spirited Beginning prequel, which basically pretended the first movie never happened, or the Casper Meets Wendy movie, which I remember liking as a kid. Reportedly, the Harvey Comics people did not care for the movie, and how it gave Casper preteen hormones. Still, if you compare it to the genre of movies where live-action characters meet a CGI version of an old cartoon character who has been written to reflect contemporary pop culture, Casper is probably the best of the bunch. It took itself seriously when it needed to, without losing a sense of fun and whimsy. In my book, it's a winner.
I cannot relate or communicate. I tend to fixate on my own self-hate.
Forget about it, you're dead.
Will a primal scream help my self-esteem?
Fatso, don't be so pathetic.
I'm a passive-aggressive, paranoid spookophrenic. My death is a mess, can't cope with the stress. I tend to obsess on my skinlessness.
Forget about it, you're dead.
I'm dysfunctional.
You are submental.
I got issues. I'm neurotic. I'm a manic, depressive, psychotic hauntaholic.
Do the 12-step. Psychologically, you don't need therapy.
Why not?
Forget about it, you're dead.